Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Welcome to this session on digital innovation in manufacturing, with a focus on Industry 4, but in particular, extended reality and how we can use that in manufacturing. You'll see a note on the bottom of Avanade. I will introduce Avanade and my colleague in a second, but you'll also see a note on the side there. We've been doing some work in conjunction with the University of Wales, Trinity St David's, and we will be referring to some of that work in the discourse. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself and my colleague. So I'll introduce myself first. So Barry Maybank, I'm the manufacturing lead at Avanade, covering UK and Europe. I'll introduce Avanade in a second, but the main speaker in this session is going to be Martin, really kind of breaking into innovation. So Martin, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Martin Harper. I'm innovation lead for Avanade in the UK and Ireland.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin. So just next slide, Martin. I'll just give you a couple of words about Avanade in terms of who we are. So we're formed by a joint venture from Accenture and Microsoft. So really we're focused on strategy and innovation. So really a leading provider in digital and cloud services and solutions, working with the Microsoft ecosystem. So really my role is to represent Avanade into our manufacturing sector and our manufacturing clients, really to kind of drive that awareness, but also help our clients, for their clients, drive the adoption of technologies and kind of transform the outcomes within their clients and experiences. And a key part of what we do is innovation. And that's going to be the sort of key thrust of what we talk about today. So a little bit of context just to sort of set Martin up really. Martin's the main act. I'm the support act really in this one. So a little bit of context. I think we kind of recognize some of these things. There's a lot of change in manufacturing, a lot of trends, a lot of drivers, a lot of challenges and opportunities. And we're seeing digital technologies really kind of converging with the operational technologies in the manufacturing domain. When I talk about the manufacturing domain, I am referring to product design and engineering, design for manufacture and supply chain. So we're already seeing a lot of opportunities and a lot of change and intervention through next-gen technologies, digital technologies, and in particular data. Now, manufacturing has arguably been lagging behind a number of other industries, maybe where customer experience has kind of been at the forefront. But I think the last year we can all recognize the massive accelerated adoption into technologies and how it's changing the landscape. So this slide here on the left is some of the sort of challenges, I suppose, that we're kind of seeing, and really we're sort of seeing how technology is kind of helping alleviate some of those challenges and stresses, but also helping us kind of realize opportunities. So I won't read them all out. You can sort of see some of those really. But on the right-hand side is really the sort of what we've categorized as 3 response areas into those, I suppose, challenges in that kind of landscape, if you like. So I'll just talk about those in brief, and we're going to kind of home into one of those areas in particular. So we've got workforce, so worker really, and workplace evolution, operational resilience, and organizational agility. I'll just touch on those 3 really to give you a sort of sense of what we mean by those. So from a kind of workforce, really transformation, we've all been aware in the manufacturing domain where technologies kind of have really enabled, I suppose, more the safety aspect of the operational world. And sort of technology has been introduced into that operational environment. But I suppose now as we're looking at keeping people safe, evolving people, looking at social distancing, we're sort of seeing the need for different types of PPE, different types of safety at work. So really that kind of driver, that impetus and that driver, along with, I suppose, arguably the kind of constraints on the workforce and the skills, is really driving automation and kind of augmented workers. I think if you couple that as well with kind of hybrid environments, we're not necessarily seeing everybody in the same workplace now. We're seeing the real kind of need, the immediate need almost, for a kind of hybrid working environment. So engineers might be working at home, working with production staff. So that need for a kind of collaborative backbone is kind of fundamental to what we're doing, as well as other capabilities. You can imagine immersive technologies augmented with things like AI and machine learning to kind of drive the operational experience. Then the second one down, operational resilience. I think we can recognize that with the kind of world we're in today. I'll just pick one example of operational resilience around supply chain. We're sort of seeing the stresses on the supply chain into the operational environment and the impact that's having. That's including surges in demand, but also kind of fluctuations in demand. So really, not just supply chain, within the operational kind of world as well, and within the workforce, massive changes in terms of resilience, and really kind of how technology can be brought to bear to help overcome some of those resilience challenges. I kind of recognize a number of things myself in one of my roles in an engagement with clients. We're helping them reshore, but we're helping them also look at the sort of aspects of the supply chain using things like simulation techniques and AI to kind of predict where things might be in conditions to start to kind of support decision making. And then the last one is organizational resiliency. It's not all about battening the hatches and kind of shoring things up and driving resilience. There's massive opportunity, particularly in the UK. Where we're competing on a global stage, and we've got DNA, we've got innovation DNA in our bones and manufacturing DNA. So really, we're sort of seeing organizations renewing their opportunities for growth, starting to think about creating that kind of, I suppose, agile core based on technology, but also starting to look at different ways of working and starting to look at agile ways of working, driving change in a kind of fast and incremental fashion. And actually, we've seen a lot of that recently with things like the ventilator charge that Martin will probably refer to, where we're seeing technology being adopted super quick timescales. We're seeing collaborative platforms rolled out in days. We're seeing data capabilities and augmented worker capabilities being rolled out in days rather than the weeks. So there's a new speed to change and how we can, I suppose, respond to this kind of need and opportunity. And innovation's at the heart of that speed of agility and how quickly we can innovate based on commercially available capabilities that are here today. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Martin to kind of drill into that, in particular, that kind of worker area, and talk in terms of in a bit more detail about extended reality. Over to you, Martin.
Super. Thank you, Barry. So hi, everyone. So what I'm going to go through today with you is I'm going to provide an overview of what we mean by extended reality, or XR, as it's commonly referred to. I'm going to talk about some of its use cases generally and in manufacturing, and then also some of the projects that Avanade specifically has worked on in this space. So what is XR, or extended reality? It's a spectrum, essentially, going from augmented reality to virtual reality, with mixed in the middle. Augmented reality, most commonly seen on things like mobile apps. You will have a digital layer over the real world, access through your mobile device. Commonly seen on, Pokemon Go is a really fantastic example of that, and obviously probably the most popular one to date. On the far right, virtual reality, using typically a headset. Usually you have to be kind of sitting down or in a controlled environment to use it. And it's full immersion in a digitally simulated world. You cannot interact with the real world around you. It's completely virtual interactions in a completely virtual environment. And sitting in the middle, the area we'll primarily be talking about today is mixed reality. And it kind of is what it says in the tin. It's a combination between sort of augmented and full immersion, in that I can put on a headset, and I'll show you some in a second. I can have a digital layer of holograms projected over my real environment. But instead of having to use something like a mobile application or a controller to interact with that layer, I can interact with it with my own body. I could have a virtual cube or holographic kind of dog, for example, on my desk right now. And I'd be able to pick it up with my hands, move it around, resize it, make it bigger, make it smaller. So that is sort of mixed reality in the center. So in terms of devices, I've mentioned some of these already. Like I said, augmented reality, typically or most commonly for consumers, accessed through a mobile device. But you also have some devices you can retrofit to things like helmet hardware. So in the sort of top left there, you've got the RealWear sort of attachment you can use on site. On the far right, you'll have your kind of virtual reality headsets. So I've got one here. This is a consumer unit. This is an Oculus Go. I think this sort of first or second gen one. And as you can see, it's kind of, if I was to put this on, it's full immersion. It's kind of blanketed at the side, so I wouldn't be able to see the world around me. I'd be fully immersed. And these types of headsets come with controllers to interact with that virtual environment. In the center, you've got mixed reality. And the device that we most commonly use for this is a HoloLens 2 headset from Microsoft. So I'm able to sort of quickly put this on, and then holograms will start appearing around me. But the benefit of this is that I can still see my entire environment around me. I'm completely safe. And for example, like the glass on the front is certified as safety goggles. And also if I'm working in an environment where maybe, yes, at one point I want access to sort of data projected holographically for me to use to make my job easier, but then I want to go back to doing something that's maybe a very manual task where that might be distracting. It's designed to have a visor that flips up and down as well for ergonomic reasons. So that's the kind of device landscape at the moment. In terms of where everything sits in terms of services, as a wide landscape for this, we typically operate either in the sort of like, I would say, first and third party app space, or the kind of tailor-made solution space. But there's a wide variety. And when I say kind of first and third party apps, I'm talking about kind of off the shelf applications from the likes of kind of Microsoft, or I think Bentley have some, maybe Siemens as well. PTC, I believe, do have some as well. And what we've seen definitely over the past, I would say 18 months to 2 years, is that the rise in adoption of XR devices has completely kind of dovetailed with the rise in more kind of first and third party apps. It used to be, so I've been working with these types of headsets for probably about 4 or 5 years now. So kind of back about 4 years ago, when we had the first generation of HoloLens, everything had to be tailor-made, kind of custom built from the ground up for a customer. And you could do fantastic things with that, but the kind of barrier to entry in terms of cost was quite high. But now with the kind of first and third party apps that provide things like remote assistance or kind of holographic training aids, the cost has just kind of fallen off a cliff. The barrier to entry is a lot lower, so adoption is going a lot higher now. And I will talk about some of these applications in a second. In terms of where we see XR having applications in manufacturing, there's kind of 4 key ones, and I'll go left to right. So communications. One of the biggest drivers of adoption I've seen, especially over the last 18 months, coincidentally, with COVID and various international lockdowns, is the need for experts to have a presence in a place that they are not physically located. And I'll talk about some specific examples later on where we've helped with this. But what we're seeing is a lot of customers do have experts kind of maybe very centrally located, be it kind of in a head office or kind of one particular site. And in a typical, month, they might be traveling all over the world to try, set up machinery, observe people through safety procedures, or conduct training. But they're unable to do that at the moment. And what these technologies enable them to do is have that expertise provided remotely in a very immersive way. So, for example, you could put on a mixed reality headset if you're in, I'm just going to say Spain, and you're trying to set up a piece of machinery or run through a set of procedures, but you don't necessarily know how to or would like some guidance. You can call someone up using the headset who's maybe based in, London or Birmingham or Edinburgh, wherever they may be, and they can see what you can see and provide that guidance remotely and perform all the necessary checks. Similarly, this kind of cascades into things like safety, in that if you are on site somewhere, and again, maybe you're used to having a safety inspector guide you through certain processes, or maybe organizations are used to doing regular safety checks in person. Someone can put on a device, walk around a site with someone having a presence within their headset, being able to see what they can see, guide them in specific ways, ask them to check specific things as they go along. You can also use it for things like wayfinding as well. And what I mean by that is that you may have seen that there are some augmented reality applications on mobiles that are sort of tied to mapping tools. So, in case of an emergency, let's say, maybe it's a fire drill or a fire emergency, you've got a very large site, and maybe the safety gathering point is on the other side of the site that you are on. You could put up a mobile device and you would see arrows kind of holographically appearing in front of you to guide you across the sites to safety. So next up, where we see these use cases most frequently is training. And again, we've got some really interesting examples to talk about later. Virtual reality and kind of augmented and mixed all play a part in this training spectrum. So for example, you can use virtual reality headsets to train people in a location, say a head office, instead of everyone having to be on a particular site using physical machinery. They could be anywhere in the world. They could be in their own home even. And obviously that's especially pertinent now. You could be taking someone through virtually how to use a piece of machinery or how to deal with certain scenarios. And the benefit you have is that, one, they don't all have to be located centrally with a trainer, but they also you don't have to have kind of physical kit that needs to be tested to destruction. But also you can run scenarios kind of over and over again so that people can improve whilst actually performing tasks, rather than having to kind of read about them in a PDF document or watch a video about it or learn in a classroom. They can learn in a much more immersive way. And there are plenty of studies out now that show that this is a much more effective way of learning tasks, because it is essentially learning by doing. And then finally, process and sort of optimization. You can run kind of virtual work audits and validations to ensure quality, compliance, and then also right at the start of maybe like onboarding someone into an organization. Whereas that that can take weeks at a time, especially when you're trying to coach people how to perform kind of repeatable tasks. You can now develop a training application, be it augmented, mixed, virtual, to again just run them through repeatable tasks and reinforce those sequences. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a couple of use cases now to kind of show you where some of these are being kind of developed globally. The first one, we're talking about kind of virtual meetings at this point. So this is on that communications area. And this is a company called Spatial. And what Spatial have is an application primarily used, I think it's through the HoloLens device, for virtual meetings and virtual collaboration. And their kind of key point is that virtual meetings shouldn't just be being able to talk to someone, or even necessarily just be able to see someone. It's about creating that immersive, collaborative experience that sometimes you don't get with software like Microsoft Teams or Zoom, whatever it might be. And so their application means that you can create virtual avatars of yourselves. You can do it with kind of like cartoonish like representations, but they can also take actual kind of images of yourself and turn that kind of using, I think it's machine learning, into 3D representations of what that person looks like, just to make it a little bit more immersive. And obviously it's getting better all the time. But the key thing it enables you to do is what you're seeing on screen now, is that collaborative approach where you can bring in content into the center of a room and all be able to see what's going on, all be able to talk and contribute on, be it a design, a map, or in this case, I think it has actually been used by NASA previously for co-designing parts of I think it's the latest Mars rover, which obviously now I think it landed in the past couple of months. Okay. Next up, in terms of just talking about virtual meetings still, and again, trying to talk about lowering the barrier for entry. Microsoft have released into, I think it's private preview at the moment, Microsoft Mesh, which is again just another kind of enterprise collaboration platform. And you can see here we've got kind of two avatars. These are my colleagues Alex and Matthias. One of them based in the Netherlands, one of them is based in Germany, and they very quickly were able to spin up this kind of collaboration space where they could collaborate on the design of a building. I think they were specifically talking about where to place solar panels. But they all have, it's all kind of like a relative perspective in terms of where they're placed in the room to each other as well. And the headsets now have like spatial audio. So when you're speaking to each other, it does sound like the person is sort of either directly opposite to you, or if they move around to the side of you, it sounds like they're coming from the side of you. So again, it's all with the aim of trying to increase immersion to increase collaboration and kind of try and get us to this feeling that we are in the same room together. Okay. I'm just going to move on now to virtual training examples. And just to provide a bit of kind of context in this, we are currently looking at kind of two areas of training where we think XR really adds value. One is real-time guidance. So I referenced that a bit earlier. And this would be using something like a remote assistance application where I can put on a headset or even use a mobile device. Say if I'm struggling with a particular task, but I know there is an expert in my organization that can help me, I can call them up, they can see what I can see, and then they can start going to the extent of dropping content holographically into my environment to guide me through a task. And on the right-hand side, we have sort of self-driven training is what we'd call it. And this is, again, it's kind of step-by-step training over a physical asset or over a virtual asset. And what I mean by that is that I could be trying to train myself in how to run a procedure of a particular piece of equipment. I could do this by myself by putting on headsets. Say my organization has developed a virtual training guide for this particular piece of equipment. I could look at the equipment physically in front of me, but have a holographic guide overlaid onto it. So it's telling me to run this set of setup instructions, telling me to go around to the side to check something else, and just run through step by step. And then I can just rerun it. And that data is also then saved so that the organization has a record of potentially where people might be struggling on certain repeatable tasks. Are there bottlenecks that can be addressed? Is it an issue with the sort of machinery? Is it an issue with the training? And they can make steps to address that. And similarly, you can run that not necessarily with a physical piece of sort of machinery in front of you. You could just have a 3D model in your own living room of that piece of kit and be able to run sort of training tasks against it. So the tools that we've been using for this, I mentioned this earlier, this is one of the applications that Microsoft has developed that is off the shelf. It's Dynamics 365 Remote Assist. And this can be used across a variety of devices. And it's probably where we're seeing the most sort of growth in adoption because it's not specifically about headsets. You can use it. You can use it with a HoloLens, or you could use it with a tablet. You could use it with a mobile device. And I think because obviously the headsets are more immersive and definitely add the most value, I would say, but they are obviously more expensive. I think a HoloLens 2 is about probably 3,000, £3,500 per unit, depending on what configuration you get. So we understand that can be kind of off-putting to organizations not wanting to purchase them in bulk. But what we're seeing is people opting for a mixture. So you might have headsets given to particular experts around an organization, but then maybe for engineers out in the field that don't need full immersion, they can just have the application installed on their mobile device, and that does the job just fine. This just gives you an example of sort of what it looks like. I think the benefit of the Microsoft applications is that they are kind of fully enterprise ready, and they can be completely linked into whatever systems you've already got if you are already a Microsoft house. So you can link them into something like your field service backend, which means that beyond just having the initial kind of communication with an expert, you can tie it all in with things like work orders and tracking like that. It just makes that end-to-end experience, I think, just adds greater value overall. And you can see there's people being able to drop in kind of holographic, being able to identify certain parts of equipment that need to be serviced. But you can also drop in things like imagery, you can drop in manuals, and you can drop in videos even for people to be able to use out in the field on the ground. Okay. The next one up in terms of the kind of applications we see most growth in at the moment is dynamics guides. And again, this is that kind of holographic training aid that I've referenced. And you can see there in this kind of like side picture is that's the general view you would have is, I'm trying to, I think that's an engine someone's trying to repair or make a check on. I'm being holographically shown next to a physical piece of hardware how to run a task. I have a hologram of the tool I'm supposed to be using, and then I have almost like a little slide, I suppose, with instructions on what I should be doing. So this is this shows you much kind of better actually. I think this is a safety check, and you'll see that the whole purpose of something like a HoloLens or any other type of headset really is, especially if it's mixed reality, is that the benefit is we call it heads-up, hands-free working. So you'll see as this person is moving their head around, there's a cursor that's following their eye gaze, and that is enabling them to interact with the content. They can stare at one of these arrows to go to the next step, and it has a timer on it, like a gaze timer, to move to the next step of instructions, which means that their hands can be free to perform the actual tasks. And you'll see there's holograms sort of set up on this guide, showing this person exactly where they should be looking. Okay. And all of this is set up using a companion app just on a PC. And the whole purpose of this being sort of low barrier to entry is not also just from a cost perspective, but from a resourcing perspective and a skill perspective, is that essentially all of these guides can be created on a PC using this drag and drop. If you have your photos, you've got your videos, you've got your text, you just drag them into place on the PC, and then when you put your device on your head, they appear. It's designed to be very usable. And in terms of why you would use XR in a learning environment, this is where the research has shown the most value. I've spoken about some of these already, but one is kind of being able to mirror those real life situations without necessarily having to put people into situations. If I think about potentially an oil and gas company, we know that when you're onboarding, it depends on the role you're in, but sometimes you have to send a large amount of staff actually out to an oil rig. And that's expensive, time consuming, and likely to be hazardous. So you can run some of these sort of safety checks and tasks, in the comfort of a head office somewhere, or even in someone's own home instead. You can break the barriers of distance. This is probably the main thing I've heard people say to me over the past 18 months as to why they would look to using XR. it's because they've now seen that, either because of COVID, we have a bunch of engineers that can't get out to places, in Asia or in North America, where they would usually be performing tasks and helping train people, for example. But with headsets and this type of immersive learning, they can do that over greater distance. And a lot of them now would look also to just keep that as the business as usual post-COVID, because of the amount of cost savings you're getting from not having to send people around the world constantly. So that kind of feeds into the operational cost side of it. Learning through mistakes. This is an interesting one. I've read a lot of research around, and I think I mentioned this earlier, around the benefits of learning by doing instead of learning by having someone tell you how to do something, or reading it from a manual, or watching a video. The benefits of having to be able to put on, be it kind of a virtual reality headset or see holograms around you, and just run these tasks kind of over and over again to get used to the application before you are sent into a real scenario. I think it's sort of like a 25% benefit in terms of knowledge retention and task performance, which is pretty incredible, I'd have to say. But also the one I think people often underrate with all of this and the benefits is engagement with your actual workforce and your staff. A lot of these tools are designed to be used by people who work in the field. Engineers are out and about. And oftentimes, we hear from kind of user bases within organizations we work with, is that is a user base that can often feel a little bit left behind and less engaged with, not provided with the best kind of tooling they have to perform their job. Whereas these types of tooling is designed to make their job as easy as possible for them, and to make it more comfortable, and to kind of make it more digital, so they can take advantage of things like better analytics as well. The last kind of use case I'm going to talk about is around sort of data visualization. And this isn't one that often kind of jumps into people's minds as to kind of the first thing you would look to invest in. But what we've been developing in kind of concert with other kind of industry specialisms is the ability to almost visualize an entire work site, all of the data points that feed into how you would run a factory, or just any kind of remote site. And you use things like IoT data, employee data, etc., mobile phone tracking, to build up this vision of what your organization or a particular part of your organization looks like. And it means that you have just this bird's eye view of how everything is working and can make better decisions based on what you see, rather than kind of looking at it from a spreadsheet. I'll just kind of flick through some of these. And you'll get more of an idea of this when I kind of show you a little clip. But the whole purpose of why you do this, a big one is things like safety. I think I mentioned earlier about being able to showcase things like directions to people holographically about areas they need to get to. But with this type of tooling, this type of application, it enables you to kind of view in real time where like hazards are on a site. If there's been some kind of spillage or a fire or an electrical issue, you can see that on your kind of virtual model and redirect employees away from it, redirect them to safe areas. It can be used again in this kind of safety training element of it. But then all in all, even if you kind of take away the visualization aspect of it, you have this data to try and sort of predict and prevent maybe incidents from happening again. So you're constantly improving safety. Again, I think I've mentioned this around sort of planning, routing people around sites, inspecting equipment, auditing. Auditing is actually a big request we've had from many clients around how they can use things like HoloLenses to view their sites remotely and run through sort of compliance and audit checks, given that you can fundamentally you have cameras, you have what is a Windows 10 device on your head, able to take notes as you're going around. It's a very secure device as well. So audit is a very good example. Yeah, I'll just show you the clip. So this is my colleague's living room. He always asks me to apologise when I show this for the mess in the corner from his children, but I think it's fine. But this is just an example of what I was talking about being able to use these types of devices to visualise whole kind of work sites and have all these data points around how people are moving around the site, how vehicles are moving. You have data coming off of particular parts of facilities around how equipment is performing, if anything needs maintenance, what is going on in particular cameras. And this is it's a kind of proof of concept at the moment, and this may not be valuable for every organization, but it will certainly be valuable for some, not just because it's the kind of visualization aspect, which I think can help people contextually understand an organization or a facility better, but also just because being able to react quickly to where kind of people are moving around a site is invaluable. And also being able to tie it back into things like back-end systems where you may be controlling work orders. Instead of going through maybe a 5 or 6 step process to attach a work order to an engineer who needs to go and fix something, if you can just pick up the work order with your finger and drag it onto the employee who is currently walking around a map, you've saved a few minutes there. And if you add that up over time, that's an incredible amount of efficiency gains. Okay. I'm just going to talk briefly about the kind of projects we've been working on in this space. The first one here is an oil and gas company called Subsea 7 that we worked on I guess maybe about a year ago, just when sort of COVID was really going quite badly. Subsea had an issue in that they had a piece of subsea sort of pipe laying equipment that was based in Norway that needed maintenance and logistics checks before it was deployed into active service. But the team that would usually perform that task was based in Italy. And obviously there was a complete lockdown at the time, so they could not get there. So what we did in, I think, the space of about 10 days was get a HoloLens device sent to Norway for the client to use. And then we also did a training session with the maintenance crew in Italy on how to sort of log in to Teams through their sort of the web app. And we set this up so that the engineers on site in Norway could be looking at the piece of equipment with the HoloLens on, and a team in Italy could show them exactly what they needed to do to perform that maintenance and run through these various checks before it could go into active service. The next one up, which I think Barry referenced as well, again, sort of height of COVID last year. This was actually an amazing project to work on, and some of you may or may not have heard of it. It was in the news a little bit. Was that there was a point where the UK government thought it was going to need an immense amount of medical ventilators, and there are only about sort of 2 companies, I think, in the UK that actually manufacture this device. And they sort of didn't manufacture them in large numbers. Kind of prior to COVID, it wasn't an incredibly in-demand piece of equipment, and we needed to get from something about 150 units a month to more than 30,000 was the aim. I think it was 10 years worth of ventilators in 10 months, in 10 weeks. And so various companies came together. You may have seen in the news companies like McLaren, Dyson, GKN Aerospace, kind of volunteering their time and their facilities to say, look, we have the facilities to manufacture components for this, but what we don't have are the skills, the knowledge base from medical to develop medical devices. We're used to building cars or airplane parts, and so kind of long story short, Avanade got involved with Microsoft to, 1, supply a lot of HoloLens devices to these companies, and 2, take essentially the manuals from the medical device companies of how to build a ventilator. We turned those into holographic training guides and gave them to these other volunteer companies. And so that engineers who had never built a ventilator before could put on a headset and be shown step by step how to perform each task to building that component, and pass it on to the next person, and they would do the same with a different holographic guide. And it was a fantastic success and a really great project to be involved in. It's very satisfying. And the last one, again, this is a client of ours called ABB Turbocharging, and they wanted us to help them develop holographic guides for creating turbochargers. Again, it's about this kind of upskilling and training aspect of XR. And we got to the point where we've got this completely kind of blown out holographic view of a turbocharger part by part. The people being trained on it can see exactly where each component needs to go and what checks to perform on each component. And this is all run holographically, all with the aim of reducing downtime, faster time to repair. It has a knock-on effect of improving SLAs and compliance rates. And overall, it's just enhancing productivity. And I believe this is something they're looking to roll out more widely beyond this kind of specific model of turbocharger. So with that, I think I'll hand back to Barry. So I hope you've all found that interesting. I think there's going to be time for questions, but I will hand over to Barry for the last segment.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. Yes, if you've got any questions, just pose them into the comments section. I'll probably prompt you with a couple actually as well, Martin, but just to sort of wrap up before we take any last minute questions. Great examples there of innovation, really kind of innovation in terms of the way we work and using kind of commodity capabilities there, along the way, but deployed really, really quickly. And I think that's the sort of spirit of change and innovation in terms of what we're going through. Just a couple of more things, really. I mean, I'm not going to drill into this slide here, but some of the areas that we're looking at in terms of, I suppose, next waves of innovation. And like I said, I'm not going to go into massive detail here, just to kind of reference points. Significant investment in terms of corporate responsibility. In Wales, there's massive, I suppose, investment in renewable energy, for example, electrification, wind, etc. So we're sort of seeing all sorts of applications of technology into those kind of areas. So really, this is not about technology. This is about business outcomes and using technology in very innovative ways. I think that's a sort of sense of what we're talking about here. But from a manufacturing point of view, we're seeing a lot more digital meets operational technologies, that kind of interlock, if you like, of really kind of powering the design experience, the commissioning experience, the production, the supply chain, the in-field experience. So I think that's really kind of where we're seeing things going. And interestingly, it's a conversation we had at the plenary was about skills shortage. Now, I know that Wales, for example, is investing a lot with some of the faculties. I mentioned University of Wales, Trinity St David's. We're trying to work with them at the moment in terms of supporting their learning into manufacturing. But the examples that Martin spoke to there, I think it's about changing the environments we're working in. And actually, if you think about manufacturing, maybe we're not so tied to those physical facilities. We could have clusters and hubs elsewhere where we could bring in different sort of creative disciplines, starting to use virtual collaborative capabilities to kind of hook in with production and even customers as well. So I think there's massive innovation really in terms of how we collaborate, how we use some of these capabilities, and maybe how we change some of the dynamics and make the UK a real driving force in innovation and competitiveness. So if there's any kind of questions there, I'll take them in the last minute, really. But I know learning and skills is a massive, it's a massive kind of investment area. Martin, sort of tips and tricks, really. Give me a last sort of 2 seconds.
Well, there's a chat from Asnaji about the vision for where immersive technology hardware might head in the next sort of 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, go for that one.
To that, I would say, because I've spoken about this recently with some colleagues around whether there'll be, things like a hardware war between companies. And I actually think that it's all going to become very bespoke in that I don't think things like consumer XR and sort of enterprise XR will overlap as such. I think that overall, things are obviously just going to become smaller, easier to use. I think people are finally cotton on to the idea that user experience is incredibly important for adoption. So as there's more time being spent on developing applications that have input from people who will be using them. When I run projects, I want to get feedback from engineers. I don't want feedback from people who work in like the finance department. I want people who are on the ground to tell me if this is usable or not in the environment they work in. But I also think that things are just going to become faster. I showed some videos there around collaborative spaces in sort of virtual worlds. And to some degree, this is possible currently. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, it can be hard if you've got a very complex 3D model. But with the advent of 5G now, it's becoming pretty mainstream. Increasingly, I think kind of virtual collaboration is going to become much easier and much more just like the obvious thing to do when you're trying to build a product, for example, or design a house even. I think that's kind of where we'll see kind of the most development.
That's great, Martin. I'm just conscious of time here. So listen, thank you all for your time today. It's been a great session. We've really enjoyed it. Reach out. I think there's lots of ecosystems partners out there to help people. I mentioned the manufacturing faculty of University of Wales, Trinity St David, just one of a number of facilities in region to kind of help industry, but also educate as well. But really appreciate your time. If you want any help or advice from us, just reach out direct, and we'd be glad to engage. Thank you all for your time, and have a great day and rest of the week.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners,